We're actually going to talk right now to Noah Abrahams, who was, until very recently, a BBC reporter and journalist. He had a very successful career, actually. He's a young man on BBC local radio in sport, and he has decided to resign from his freelance role, I should say, at the BBC because of what is happening. I'm delighted that Noah has given talkTV his first interview. Noah, you're very welcome to the programme. How are you today?
Well, as with everyone in the Jewish community, I'm not amazing. British Jews are terrified, as am I, and I've just made a really monumental career decision and life decision. So, as with everyone, going through a really hard time at the moment.
So you are, I think, 22 years old. Is that right, Noah?
That's right.
And you've been training to be a journalist. You've done a course, university course. You've been very successful, if you don't mind me saying so, for someone at a young age. You've been on the air. Usually it takes a few years for people to get on the radio, but you've been at a number of local BBC local stations, including BBC Radio Derby, where actually I used to work. There are a good bunch of people there. There's some of them still there. But you've decided, because of the actions of or inaction, I suppose, of the organisation more generally, not to call Hamas terrorists, that the time has come for you to go. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have morals and I stick by them. I think the words justified and unjustified have been thrown around a lot since the weekend. I think the BBC's refusal to use the correct terminology is unjustified. Words are quite literally fundamental to the English language. They impact how we think, how we react, how we act. They have influence. The phrase freedom fighter distracts from the reality of terrorism. To those easily influenced, it implies what is not. These people aren't freedom fighters. They are not, as John Simpson refers to them, as gunmen. They are terrorists. And there are probably people watching who will be thinking, this boy, my God, has thrown it all away because of some words. But terminology, words, when neglected, have the power to fuel hate. They have the power to put fuel on the fire. And Peter, believe me, as a Jewish person, there is already enough fuel on that fire.
Tell me why you feel so strong. I can tell from what you're saying why you feel so strongly about this, but you're at the start of your career, you're doing well. Some people might say, why throw it all away over this? What would you say to them?
Well, when your local high street, Golders Green, has been smashed up, with a kosher restaurant's windows destroyed, when I went to a Jewish school, when Jewish school children, Peter, can't go to school feeling safe on their way there, when synagogues have security so heightened that it strikes fear into you. We're taking off our jewellery. We're taking off our necklaces. People will avoid London tomorrow because of the threats. That is fear. And anything that happens in Israel, like it or not, has a direct effect on the British community. And British Jews are terrified, and so am I. And I don't feel like I can stand by the BBC any longer with their stance on their terminology. What
has been the reaction from your former colleagues, Noah?
You know what? It's been supportive and understanding, and I think a lot of people support what I'm saying and the way I'm going with this, and people understand it. When the governments of the Western world, when Joe Biden, when our royal family correctly refer to those in Hamas as terrorists and murderers, why aren't the BBC, arguably the most influential broadcaster on the planet? We're human beings. We have our eyes open. We know, you and I know, that Hamas are not freedom fighters. They're not militants. They're terrorists.
Yep.
And the BBC will preach that they've got their founding principles. They have their stance and impartiality. But our defence secretary yesterday, he asked them to get their moral compass out. Well, here's me getting my moral compass out. And I can't condone what the BBC are doing. The chief rabbis asked the BBC to use the correct terminology, to use the correct language. Language is so serious. To refer to Hamas as what they are, to label them they're a terrorist organisation. To label them as terrorists, but they won't, because why? Because terrorism is a loaded word.
What would you say to other BBC employees who might be thinking the same thing as you, maybe people who've been as affected as you have, or are thinking very seriously about their position within the organisation? What would your words to them be?
Well, most people in the BBC know of someone else who's Jewish. They might have Jewish friends or family. I'd ask them to put themselves in my position, in the position of my friends and family who know people in Israel affected by this war that's been brought upon Israel. People know, I know people who know people who have been taken hostage, who have been killed, and words matter. We study journalism and we become journalists because we believe in our morals. And the BBC are getting a lot of attention because they are the most influential broadcaster on the planet. So when you're that influential and you're using the incorrect terminology, it's huge. I don't need to remind anyone of the atrocities being committed in Israel.
Maybe we should actually talk about the last few days in terms of your journey kind of to this moment where you've given in your notice. You're saying you're not accepting any more shifts, you're not going to work for the BBC again. Just tell me about the last few days, what you've been through in terms of your own position and also people you know in your extended network, because you've just referenced people there have been taken hostage. There are people in Israel who are suffering from this terrorism, and it is terrorism. I totally agree with every word you're saying. Just talk me through the last few days for you, Noah.
The last few days as a Jewish person, as a young Jewish person, have been horrific. People are scared. When your grandparents are scared, when people are crying, when people your age are pouring out in emotion because they don't know what to do, because they feel so helpless because of what's going on. It is just horrific. It's awful. It's just beyond words, Peter, reading and seeing what's happening to people my age. And I think that's why I feel this so powerfully, so passionately, because these people my age who are being murdered, they are being murdered by terrorists. And I feel so strongly because of the lack of the BBC's ability, they won't move on their stance to call them terrorists. If not terrorists, then what are they?
Well, we asked the BBC specifically about you, about their reaction to what you've done, Noah, and they said they wouldn't discuss individual cases. Funny how they discuss individual cases when it's, I don't know, Gary Lineker or someone like that, but apparently they won't discuss yours. A BBC spokesperson said, we don't even know if they're male or female, said, "We always take our use of language very seriously. Anyone watching or listening to our coverage will hear the word terrorist used many times. We attribute it to those who are using it, for example, the UK government. This is an approach that has been used for decades," says the BBC spokesperson, and is in line with that of many other broadcasters. The BBC is an editorially independent broadcaster whose job is to explain precisely what is happening on the ground so our audiences can make their own judgment. John Simpson, you referenced earlier as well, the BBC World Affairs editor, has tweeted, "British politicians know perfectly well why the BBC avoids the word terrorist, and over the years plenty of them have privately agreed with it. Calling someone a terrorist means you're taking sides and ceasing to treat the situation with due impartiality. The BBC's job is to place the facts before its audience and let them decide what they think, honestly and without ranting. That's why in Britain and throughout the world, nearly 500 million people watch, listen to and read us. There's always someone who would like us to rant. Sorry, it's not what we do." What do you make of that statement from the BBC and indeed that tweet from John Simpson, one of its most senior broadcasters, Noah?
I think it's an outdated approach. I think, as your previous guest mentioned, we live in the 21st century. Why can't we adapt to what's going on in the world when the royal family have, when the British government have, when the opposition have, the head of the Labour Party, our Foreign Secretary, Joe Biden, Paris have had the Israeli flag emblemed on their Eiffel Tower. Paris notoriously it has been fueled in the past by anti-Semitism. Western governments, the rest of the Western world, are backing Israel in this decision and using the words terrorists. And there's also the point, as made by the chief rabbi, that not using the word terrorist in itself violates impartiality. I don't understand it. I don't see why they refuse to use the correct terminology. And like I said, you can say that they're just words, that words have no impact. Well, we wouldn't be here if words had no impact.
Totally agree with you, Noah.
And we're journalists, and we know the meaning of impact. I study journalism just as nearly everyone else at the BBC has. I know the rules on impartiality, and I know where the BBC stands on impartiality. But it's not right, and I think they know it's not right.
Noah, I think our viewers and listeners know that you are right and that the BBC is wrong. There are lots of people texting in, tweeting in support. Sarah says, "Noah, you're a brilliant young man." John says, "Viewers must send a hard-hitting message to the BBC by boycotting the channels. The BBC are a disgrace to the United Kingdom. It is time to dissolve the BBC." Sarah says, "Somewhere like the UK, he shouldn't have to be scared. What have we turned into? I'm so ashamed." Paul says, "Total respect to young Noah Abrahams. I wish we had more like him to stand up for British values and culture, the way this young man is standing up for Israel and the Jewish people. Fair play, young man. Sadly, our leaders are gutless and will never show your resolve." That's Paul in Fife. David says, Noah Abraham's a very wise old head on very young shoulders. Good on him. I wish him well for the future. And on that note, actually, Noah, what is your future in journalism? Do you think you'll stay in journalism? You'll try to work somewhere else? Because this is a major, major decision for you, and there's really no going back to the BBC, even if you wanted to, which I know you don't want to.
No, there's no going back, and it's a decision that I obviously thought carefully about. And you know, who turns down BBC Radio football commentaries? Every young boy's dream, if you don't become a footballer, it's to become a commentator. I was commentating on League One football for the BBC at 22 years old. I was one of the youngest football commentators to ever call a game for BBC Radio. I was living my dream. I love that job. But my morals don't. My morals cannot stand by the organisation who employed me. And as for my future, I really don't know. It leaves me in a vulnerable position. However, I'd rather be in a vulnerable position than to go against my morals and to go against what the Jewish community believes in. It isn't right. They are terrorists. They are murderers. This is Hamas we're talking about. They're not militants. They're not freedom fighters. Freedom fighters can imply a completely wrong thing. BBC is influential. They know that. They have to get it right.
Noah, I think you've spoken for a lot of people with their frustration, not just about the BBC, although that is clearly a big part of this, but also just about the situation in general. We need to call these things what they are. We need to tell the truth and just be very, very clear. It is so clear that Hamas are terrorists. We're getting so many people getting in touch on this. Brad in Cambridge says, afternoon Peter, I'm full of admiration for Noah. How the BBC can claim that they're unbiased and keep a straight face when they say it is just beyond laughable. Adam says, good on this man, I hope he's the last one to hand in his notice in before this moral vacuum is shut down. And Sarah says, Noah needs to join talkTV. Well, we don't really cover sport, but we have some friends down the hall at Talk Sport who do. Noah, I have your number, and I'm going to ring you after the show, and we're going to see if we can put you in touch with some of the managers here, because you're clearly a talented, principled person who has done great things, and we really admire you. So well done, Noah, and I wish you all the very best for the future, and I promise you I'll give you a ring after the show when I come off air to see if I can put you in touch with some of the managers. Maybe there's something we can do, maybe there isn't, but we'll see where we are.
You're very kind. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate your time.
That is Noah. Thank you very much indeed. Noah Abraham's there, who's now a former BBC reporter and journalist. So thank you to him. Lots